Hello and welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. This is our audio game jam where we pitch brand new video game ideas back and forth and just try to make something of it out of our inane ramblings and try to turn it into a viable, marketable product so that we can both independently get rich and become acclaimed video game developers.
Yeah.
Those video game developers that work for Acclaim, it's getting harder and harder every year.
You know, speaking of acclaimed game developers, I hate to plug another non-us podcast on this show.
Well, then don't do it if you hate it so much.
Well, I have to this time because it's a show I love so much.
Okay.
Steve Gaynor of Fulbright fame.
Tacoma and Gone Home.
Yeah, he announced...
And Minerva's Den.
And Minerva's Den, yeah. Announced that he is bringing back his podcast Tone Control for a second season now that he has a little bit of downtime. And so that is interviews with real game developers. Maybe we should go and listen to his podcast and see if maybe we could get one of those people on our show to pitch a crazy game idea.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Get some real devs on here.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm going to need it because honestly, I'm glad you're going first this week because I might need all of your time to think of my idea as well.
All right. Well, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H because we both have a very similar first name. So similar, and it might just be identical.
I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q. And I hate to continue with the banter, H, but a friend of mine just asked recently, how often when you give a coffee shop your name, do they write Brian instead? You know,
whenever I talk to people at parties, I put out my name and there's two responses. They'll either say back the one that they think it is, which is about 50-50 Ryan or Brian.
Yeah.
Or they'll ask me. And really, I don't care that much. Like, really, a name is just them trying to get my attention.
Yeah.
So as long as they make meaningful eye contact with me and say some word, the task will be accomplished.
I agree with you, and thank you for that extra 30 seconds of time for me to stall. I really appreciate it.
If you're going to give me the wrong name, then I prefer that you add letters to my name instead of taking them off of my name because I don't have that many to spare.
It's
Maybe
true.
By Yan or something like that. And it might work for some people, but I don't think I could pull it off. Anyways, let us get into some video game pitches and see what kind of ideas we can come away with this week. And this one is not necessarily a game, but it was inspired by a game, and I think it kind of occupies the same digital space. One of the things that I really love doing is I love going to art museums. It's one of my favorite things when I go to different countries in the world. And I've also had a long-standing interest in art history. I've found that it's actually not the easiest thing to educate yourself on. I mean, there's so many resources on the internet, but it always feels like kind of a lacking experience. Google has an excellent archive of art through their, Google Arts projects, and they have really ridiculously high resolution pictures of famous paintings, of just thousands and thousands of paintings from classical art and modern art as well. And that's really cool. You can zoom in really close and see all the cracks and the brush strokes and everything, and that's great. But going to more art museums, I start to realize how much is missing by just, doing that part of the experience instead of actually walking into the halls where all of the pieces are contextualized. And, there's a certain way that a painting could be framed. It could be kind of in a large group of paintings, and it could be raised far off the ground. It could be close down where people can step right up and smell the paint. It can be alone on a wall. It can be suspended from the roof by chains. It could be nailed to the wall. It could even be like a statue freestanding in the middle of a room, or the colors that the walls are painted. Like, there's so much about the presentation of art, the way that it's contextualized in its space, and also the kind of implicit curation of a museum that kind of walks you through a narrative, maybe divided up. The rooms have some sort of thematic resonance with one another. There's a progression from room to room that helps you better understand the progression of a movement or something like that.
Yeah.
And so what I want to do is create a 3D, like virtual museum. And this can either be a museum that can be populated by original works, or it could be like a recreation of a famous museum, like the National Portraits Gallery or the Louvre or something like that. And all these giving access to these famous places to people who otherwise couldn't afford to travel all the way over to Europe or wherever these museums are. Because, as big of a museum buff as somebody could be, they're likely not going to have the chance to travel, all across the world to go to all the different museums that are worth seeing. And I think making that experience accessible is important, like on a intellectual level. Like it's good, like personally enriching. And so it could be like good high resolution prints, but it's all laid out in this 3D museum. And you can click on a painting to get like a narrated tour guide, like explanation of the painting or the sculpture or the, props or whatever. And it would be just like you're taking a guided tour of the museum, but you don't have all of the anxieties that go with, am I standing too close to the paintings and the guard's going to yell at me, or they don't want me to drink water in this room, and that kind of stuff that, you get caught up in museums. But this was kind of inspired by a Sherlock Holmes game for the PC. It's called Sherlock Holmes Nemesis, and it might be familiar to connoisseurs of fine internet culture for being the birthplace of the Creepy Watson video. And if you don't know that, then I would highly recommend going to YouTube and searching for Creepy Watson, because it is genuinely hilarious. But the opening level takes place inside of the National Gallery over in London. And it's actually super cool because they have a lot of the same paintings that are really there, and all the rooms look the same. So I was just in the National Gallery like, a month or two ago, and I got to walk around in the same space that I knew from the game, and it's like, oh, cool. I love this kind of thing. Anyways, I was just so fascinated by walking around as Sherlock Holmes in that art museum and just getting in close and looking at all the paintings, even though I had access to thousands and thousands more paintings via Google. There's something cool about walking up to a painting and examining it in a way that it's just not as gratifying and satisfying an experience to just like scroll through a bunch of thumbnails and click on the one that catches your eye. It feels more important as a painting you have to walk up to rather than a thumbnail that you click in a sea of thumbnails. So anyways, I've spoken too much. That is my idea, virtual art museum. Let us get going on that one.
Well, I love the idea. I'm a big fan of museums myself, being a designer, and the idea of being able to bring some of these museums that admittedly I will never get to go to, some of them anyway, to me is really powerful. Because as you know, a lot of museums have their own sort of personality about them, or even in the people visiting them, there's a certain level of personality, all the way up from a very specific group of people, all the way down to, tourists from around the world, which I'm sure the Louvre gets and that sort of thing.
The Louvre had previously worked with Nintendo on a 3DS guide for the museum. And I think originally it was just sold in the building itself. And you could download the game, and I guess it gave you some sort of like history on each painting.
Oh, wow.
Kind of like the audio guides that you get in a lot of museums. Now, I'm not sure if you could like browse the museum or whether it was just kind of flipping through numbers and text stuff. I never downloaded the game, but it did become available on the eShop so that the entire world can download it. But I don't know what that experience was. And
yeah,
I know
it must
just
have been
recently,
less guided or something, seeing as it could be remote.
And I know that just recently, actually on the day of recording, Rock Paper Shotgun put out a story about a game on itch.io called the Zium Museum, which is spelled Zium. And that looks to be kind of similar to what I'm talking about. It's a 3D museum, but instead of being populated by actual works from history, it is kind of a collaborative effort with a lot of digital artists. They are all kind of allotted a certain amount of space. And so you can walk through a museum that has works specifically made for that space. And of course, being a digital product, it can do some things that wouldn't be possible in a physical space. And so that's cool. So there are people out there doing this exact kind of thing, but I think that there's room for collaborations with actual museums and universities and stuff.
One of my favorite tropes in fiction, especially more recently, is what things like National Treasure and the Da Vinci Code do, which is create a central mystery around some famous artist or famous, artifact that might end up being in a museum. And, one of my favorite games is Gone Home. And that, for all intents and purposes, you might as well be walking through a museum. It's not presented like one, but it's a bunch of things that you can kind of touch and you can hear stories about, but you yourself are not necessarily participating in those stories. And so I think taking a game like that and bringing it to a well-recognized space or with well-recognized pieces of art is compelling. And I want to throw you this twist. One of the things I like to do is follow the Reddit art subreddit. And that allows me to go through, and I have an app on my phone, and it turns my phone almost into a museum of a ton of endless user-generated content that's up and downvoted. So I almost say I could visit any museum. The idea of there being like a new type of special museum that is works from, the internet in some ways, whether or not it gets that data from Reddit or Twitter, that could be just as interesting to see pieces that only live on screens presented in that more classical context, a way that they might never get presented otherwise.
And also there are a couple of art gallery games that are built for VR. And I think these are just kind of like startup projects. I've played one of them before, and it's pretty cool to get up close to statues and stuff. One of them that I had seen before is called the VR Museum of Fine Art, which you can get on Steam for free, actually. And it's pretty cool. You can get up close to these various statues and paintings and stuff. I don't think it's modeled on a real museum, but there are some real pieces there. There's the Terracotta Army and the Mona Lisa, among others. And so it's cool because you get that kind of one-to-one scale that you get in VR. You get the feeling of actually being somewhere and teleporting around. But, overall, you get that feel. The only limitation is that VR is very low resolution.
Yeah.
And so you can get in close to something, but you're just kind of like seeing a fuzzy version of it. So it's not ideal if you really want to admire the intricacies of a painting. But I think giving users the option at least would interest some people.
Yeah, especially when you consider screen resolutions going to 4K now, depending on the size of your screen, pixels almost vanish, and to be able to use that technology not just to display blood and guts but to actually show real works of art, not saying games are not art, obviously they are, but
well, we have this discussion now.
Classical forms of art, I guess I will say, is really compelling. And I think, like you said, I find myself wanting to keep the experience purely a museum, but also, I could see if we are trying to do a marketable thing, if we are trying to have a hook or a gimmick, maybe there's, you can go and somehow enter into the painting and like live in a, fictional vignette of the world of that painting in a 3D space. And as you go around and interact with objects in the environment, you're actually learning about the work or the artist is kind of a fun way to experience and be taught those type of things.
Find yourself in Bob on Battlefield. That's a cool idea, but I feel like it kind of limits the people who would want to get involved with something like this. Like if we go up to a museum and say, hey, would you mind giving us an afternoon to photograph all of your paintings and we can give you a cut of the profits? And, This could be a way to kind of spread your name across the entire world to audiences who would never ever have the chance to come here otherwise, educate the people and, that kind of thing. Like, I can see people getting on board for that. Like, yeah, sure. Like we can collaborate versus, hey, do you want to give us 3D models based on all of your paintings and little vignettes to...
right.
That's
at that
a harder
point, you have
sell.
to hire a studio and say,
Right.
okay, these people are going to build. But yeah, I agree. I think being able to go, and plus, jumping inside a painting doesn't work for something like Michelangelo or whatever.
You can go to a Ninja Turtles level.
Well, of course, a battle stage. It's almost like you could couple this with your traditional museum audio tour, but how do you see, if any, sort of progression lining up for something like this?
Well, I don't really see a lot of like gamifiable mechanics.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you can tie some achievements into like, I've seen this many museums and stuff, but like, I think there's just pure satisfaction in just going to these museums and learning about these different things. And, you can go to different museums just to see what's there, not necessarily trying to level up your character or gain better like perception and combat skills. Although saying that, I do fully realize now that it's out in the open that the Louvre is going to be turned into a Counter-Strike map at some point.
If it hasn't already. Let me pose you this, because I think this is a fun art history type of exercise that could work for something like this. I love going to museums that have very old artifacts and objects. And a lot of times these are mundane objects. They're bowls, they're spoons, they're things that managed to survive throughout the years. But I love the idea of, the main serving, the sort of, main dish is being able to visit these museums and see these exquisite pieces. And then on the side, you could have a few really, I think, classy/smart mini games where it's like, hey, put these objects in their chronological order of creation.
Okay.
And, try and sort out these items based on where they come from on a map or things like that. Yeah. So you're tying in, giving someone, because a lot of museums show a lot of pieces from a lot of places. So giving someone the holistic context of saying, okay, I can kind of see how this art was evolving from cultures and places and inspiration by association of the different pieces from different museums could be really interesting.
Also for 3D objects, being able to pick them up and rotate them around just like Shenmue or Gone Home, like we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyways, that's all the time that we have to spend in this museum. I'm not a good curator. I did not come in with a title already. But maybe something like gallery tour or something. Like, this is supposed to be boring software. It's not like not boring software, but it's not Doom.
Sure. No, right. You don't want to oversell. It's.
Although you could mod guns into it, and I encourage that, but
I suppose so.
Let us move on to our second pitch for the day, which comes from you, Q. What do you have for us?
Okay, well now I think I've got it. I think you've given me enough time, and I hope it's something okay. I love the Mega Man games, and I particularly have a soft spot for the very awkward and not necessarily beloved Mega Man Legends.
The 3D one on the N64 or PlayStation 1, is that?
PlayStation 1, you got it. You could awkwardly, literally kick a can in that game. That's how exciting it was. But I want to take Mega Man and take inspiration from Nier Automata, which I've been playing some of lately, and bring back Sigma and frame a new Mega Man story that is Sigma's back in your traditional, there's 9 bosses or whatever throughout the land, but also Zero, who's a central character of the Mega Man series, tells you that the creator has actually made 10 Mega Man, and you're playing Mega Man 10 or Mega Man X, however you want to call him.
Or you can call him like Mighty Number 10, just to expedite
the mightiest of them all. So, and he's telling you there were 9 Mega Man before you, and he knows, or there was actually 10 before you. He knows he was the very first, hence his name Zero and your name 10. The way this Mega Man game works is a little bit different from your just standard defeat a boss and get their power and add it to your arsenal, though that does still exist. Along with that is a Diablo-esque or Dark Souls-esque like equipment system where defeating enemies of specific types are giving you armor pieces, chest pieces, arms, legs, that sort of thing. And you can not just have, the ice version of Mega Man here. Now you can actually have, I want the ice shoulders, but I want these, swift boots and that sort of thing. So you can mix and match pieces of armor to get unique play styles for Mega Man's loadouts. Couple that with going back to the 10 Mega Men that came before you. Along with defeating the bosses, you can also seek out these previous defective or unloved Mega Men and go back and try and hack them to upgrade what the game has traditionally given out as health upgrades. When you hack them, you actually go inside and you are playing Mega Man 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So you're almost going into cyberspace with these previous Mega Men, and you have to beat a new Mega Man level in the style of those old games, going all the way up to Mega Man 10 or Mega Man X. So it's a lot of weird stuff. I'm hoping that we can shape it and form it like we always do, but that is my pitch.
All right, start the clock there. So you describe the mixing and matching of powers via swapping out armor pieces, which is a little bit difficult for me to envision in my mind, because I think armor, like Dark Souls, you throw on a helmet, it changes the way you look and it changes your damage stats and the things you're resilient to, but not necessarily the way that you move and attack, which is kind of the signature thing in the Mega Man series. I think what would be easier for me to understand is you could still equip different pieces of armor, but those would be more passive benefits. If the active benefits could come from, just like the regular Mega Man games, you kind of swap out your blasters that you're using. So something like a Kirby 64 type of system where you could have like 2 active slots, and you could either absorb powers from enemies, or you can go through the bosses in different order and equip up to 2 at a time and kind of mix and match the powers that way to give more combinations than just the standard, switching between the boss weapons.
I think that that's good to think of it like that. I also was considering maybe it is your primary weapon, your X-Buster, that is getting the mode switch based on what you defeated bosses with. And so those attacks are really changing with the boss. But say, for example, I'll pull examples from the X games because I'm fond of those. So there's a character named Armored Armadillo. And when you kind of supercharge up his move, it gives you a shield. I think if you're defeating enemies that are kind of his type or ilk, and earning or upgrading or building pieces of armor, maybe those things give you, passive shielding on Mega Man. So you can kind of build yourself into a class of Mega Man alongside of whatever your weapon loadout has to be.
Yeah, I think passive benefits would be a good addition to the Mega Man formula.
And then we could, of course, get into set bonuses if you get the Armored Armadillo legs and helmet and all that kind of stuff.
All via loot boxes, of course.
100%.
Gotta make that money. One of the interesting things when you were talking about kind of mixing power sets to have different attacking styles, as you mentioned, Nier Automata, I was thinking about multiple playthroughs. I think the power mixing is a really interesting idea, so I wouldn't necessarily want to hold it off for a second playthrough. But if after you beat the game with Mega Man, then you can play through the game again as each of the bosses.
Oh,
and
wow.
so they have a default blaster, and as they defeat the other bosses, then they absorb their powers, and so there's a different combination. You start off with the, Leaf Tornado, and then you get the Ice Blaster, and then that has a special like Leaf Ice combination that, only that boss can achieve. And so, you can get those different combinations that way, but that would be kind of waiting until the second playthrough or the 10th playthrough to get to the most interesting features, which is you usually want the big kind of game selling mechanics to be right there at the beginning.
I really enjoy, and I'm not through, I'm probably about 8 hours into Nier, and we could have a whole podcast about Nier and about the varied gameplay styles, but its ability to switch between the third person open world and side scrolling and top down shooting, I think between that, its third-person controls and its side-scrolling stuff, you could actually make a 3D Mega Man feel a lot like classic Mega Man in certain parts and sections seamlessly throughout the game, as opposed to always having to rely on the crutch of like, well, 3D Mega Man, we don't even know how to build one of these because it's usually just been selecting a level and going in that way.
Oh, that's right. You did pitch us as a 3D thing. Yeah, so how does that work out in your mind? What is the perspective that you think would best suit a Mega Man type game? Would this be not quite isometric, but that kind of like 3/4 overhead view, like a Power Stone type game?
The twin stick shooter?
Yeah, maybe.
No, I think in my head, the 3D Mega Man experience is a third person, probably Zelda-esque perspective for Mega Man.
With shooting elements.
With shooting elements and using, I hate to use a dated term, but Z trigger type lock-on system. The same way that you do get some of that lock-on and shooting with Nier, but I think, Mega Man is just as much about the dashing and the ability to, at least the X series, cling onto walls and avoid enemy attacks. Mm-hmm. Those are all pretty important. And I think, to me, Mega Man's ability to navigate the world and organically find, like Sigma, in X, everything kind of fictionally takes place on one big island and just different parts of the island. I think that could map really well to a controlled play space that's always filled with enemies. It feels like the whole thing is a level rather than just, going in and out.
So the thing that I think about when I think about the classic Mega Man games is the 2D perspective is really great for learning enemy patterns and having those creatures that swoop low that you have to jump over and shoot them, and jumping over pits and over projectiles and just timing out each thing very precisely. And I feel like that kind of precision is lost in 3D. There are games like Nier actually does a pretty good job of that kind of pattern learning in that very like arcadey kind of way. Fury, the boss rush, again, kind of a twin sticky type shooter game, does a good job of that kind of thing. And then, of course, stuff that is like pure twin stick, like Nex Machina and Robotron do a good job of that as well. But when I think about something like Metroid Prime or Uncharted games, like those feel a little bit less precise and
a little
pattern recognition-y, than something really like classically arcadey.
Well, I think that's why you have to probably let large sections of the game play out in a 2D space. I'm imagining maybe there are hub worlds or connected areas that are 3D, but for example, moving from place to place or scaling up to reach a destination might, like what Nier does in certain chase scenes or any kind of set pieces, pull into that side view, and you're really just kind of looking at what people have called the 2.5D view of the 3D space. Because I think Mega Man's jump and his dashing and stuff is all something that could feel great in 3D, and you wouldn't actually have to change it from its 2D control. I think it's just a matter of getting that lock-on system to feel good.
Mega Man already has annoying friends and some spotty voice acting and a really convoluted storyline, so we just need a little tiny more push to get this into full 3D Sonic territory.
It's true. And I really love the idea of let's get Rush involved, his weird red robot dog friend, to help him do some platforming challenges and that kind of thing.
Yeah. That was always an interesting mechanic, just kind of having this platform always available to you really kind of opened up this space. Like, it feels like such a cheat, but then understanding it's like, well, this is a cheat that the game is kind of built around. So
right, there are literally things that are impossible to do without really precise timing. One of my favorite Mega Man X abilities is Chill Penguin. You get the ability to cast a platform of ice that first materializes, then if it's in the middle of the air, drops to whatever the ground is, and then begins sliding forward until it hits something and shatters. And I could see something like that being analogous to the Breath of the Wild sand surfing.
Yeah,
that could feel really, really fun.
Using it as like a fast travel method. So it's Mega Man X and the iPhone 10, the Xbox One X,
right?
And there's also a Mega Man 10.
Yes, it's perfect.
What a mess. So where do you see this set in the Mega Man timeline? I don't know that much about the story, but you said it's kind of after all these other Mega Men have come before. I don't know. Throughout the Mega Man games, are these different characters all taking on the Mega Man mantle, or are they the same character and just different interpretations?
You know, I might be leaving Mega Man fans, more hardcore ones, in the dust by not knowing that fact, but to me, there was always a key distinction in that Super Nintendo era changeover from the Mega Man games to the Mega Man X series. For whatever reason, X seemed to take place in more of a dystopia, you know, as things tended to be in the early 90s. All of that sci-fi was like, oh, it's a junk town. Everything's kind of gone. The only thing left are robots. Even all the animals in the game are realized as robots, down to the bats, right?
Yeah.
So I like that era, and I do like Sigma as a bad guy. He is less Dr. Egghead from the Sonic series and a little bit more menacing. Plus, he's got a lightsaber.
I think it's Eggman, but that's a good little diss to throw out to the Sonic bad guy.
Yeah, fair enough. The reason why I wanted it during the X period is the X games give Mega Man a lot more mobility options between the slide and the sort of wall jumping. I think those are more necessary in a 3D space that is going to really give you some feeling of movement. The best movement you got in Mega Man Legends was skating around, which was a really bizarre actualization for Mega Man. Like he never has roller skates previously, so why they gave that to him is a little bit of a mystery.
Or why they didn't before. Anyways, that is all the time we have for that one. Do you have a name for this Mega Man game?
Maybe I should just play off of your previous confusion and call it Mega Man X10.
Mega Man Cross, as the Japanese would call it.
Yes, Mega
X10.
Man Cross
right.
10.
Well, you know what? We'll write it out in the show notes, and you can call it whatever you want, listeners.
Or we pull a Monster Hunter and say Mega Man Double Cross.
And not bother localizing it. Now we go back to our community for submission. This comes from David Vander Griendt, who he has clarified his pronunciation. I appreciate that.
See, but this is a good indication to the community, H, where if they write in enough times with enough ideas, we will pronounce their name correctly eventually.
Or just call them O'Brien. I don't mind.
Yeah, perfect.
David Vander Griendt says, "It was a lot of fun hearing you talk about my two submitted ideas. I was aware when I wrote them that the second one's a bit of a downer, but I like the way that you handled that and poked at the problems in making it a game. That is the pitch about a woman with memory problems. I believe we called it like remembrance or something like that. Anyways, you can look at that a few issues back and catch up on that one." David goes on to say, "If for any reason there are no more pitches left, try these." Well, you know what? We go through all the pitches, so we will take this one now. Billiards, but you shoot Kirby instead of the white ball. If you hit another ball, dead center, Kirby eats the ball and gains the special ability linked to that ball. Optionally, there could be obstacles on the table. He goes on with other pitches, but I think we'll save those for later because a Kirby billiards game is enough to talk about for now. Let us go ahead and start the clock and see where we get with that one.
I'm already excited about the soundtrack for this game. I love playing billiards video games because it's always like a smooth jazz happening in the background. But to hear that Kirby-ified and Nintendo-fied would be very fun.
I think the core mechanic, I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around. I think we need to explore this because you line up your billiard shot and you shoot Kirby at the ball. And of course, Kirby has been in this type of environment before. He's been in Kirby Tilt and Tumble, which is kind of a Marble Madness type game. I believe there were 2 of them maybe, for the Game Boy Color and maybe the DS, something like that. But anyways, you shoot Kirby at the billiard balls, and instead of knocking them out the way, he eats them. Is that correct? Or can you also knock into them? Because I feel like that would drastically affect the physics of pool.
Yeah, so that's the crux, right? How do you not mess up the pool aspect of it? But maybe Kirby bounces off Kirby is extremely light. I'm gathering that based on the fact that he can float. So maybe Kirby can only bounce off the rest of the balls, but the sort of initial ball, if he hits it perfectly in the center, he can eat it. And that is, there's actually no pockets on the table anymore, right? Kirby has to eat all of the balls that you have to get rid of.
Well, you see, that's tricky because I feel like if you just had to hit the balls to eat them, then the game would always be over in, like 15 rounds?
Sure.
So I think pockets remain a necessity, but the way that you could do this is each ball has a different kind of environmental effect. And the first ball that you hit, you kind of absorb and keep rolling as that ball. And so if you shoot yourself into a pocket, absorb the ball, then that ball is pocketed the way that a kind of a normal pool table would be set up. But each of these elemental effects that the balls carry change the way that they interact with the environment, the giant pool table. So maybe there's one of the balls is very bouncy, and so once you hit a corner, it just like really ricochets and bounces everywhere and disrupts everything. Maybe one of them has a power of like fire that really just burns up the velvet on the table as you travel, and then for the rest of the game, there's just these skid marks across the table that are...
Or balls don't travel as well or something,
Yeah, that cause like disruptions in the way that the balls travel. There could be a ball that's very heavy, and so it just really smashes the other ball if it runs into it. And that's tricky, though, because you couldn't, if you were absorbing the ball that you ran into, you couldn't aim for a corner of the... That's a contradiction, but you know what I mean. A corner of the ball to bounce it in a different direction.
Maybe you are using Kirby to initially hit the balls, and then there's something for Kirby to do. Additionally, like maybe hovering above the pool table or something is the sort of Kirby stars, or something for Kirby to consume some... I'm trying to think of some way to give Kirby things to do that aren't going to necessarily alter the game of pool, but maybe that's just my own instinct and isn't necessarily, what we have to avoid. Because what is Kirby all about? He's all about like eating things and then spitting things out.
We can put him in a wine tasting game and he'd probably be all right there.
Perfect. No, I was just going to say, maybe instead of the pool stick, what it is you're just a little physical Kirby on the table, and you can kind of suck in the cue ball and spit it, around. So like Kirby is the pool stick.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. In that
it's more of a set dressing, though, than actually changing the game of pool.
Right. Thing about that is that if you're just walking around the table, sucking up the cue ball and spitting it out, then you kind of lose Kirby is almost a perfect sphere already. And if we didn't use him as a ball, I feel like that would be a
missed opportunity.
Yeah. Maybe the game isn't a billiards game, but there's a billiards mode. But there's a lot of game that is kind of based around being in a spherical shape. And as I say this is just Monkey Ball 2.
Yeah. What? Okay, so let's say Kirby can suck up. Maybe it's billiards format. Maybe it's billiards inspired. I don't know. Kirby can suck up any one of the 7 balls, right? And each of the 7 balls on your side, the stripes or the solids, whatever, are corresponding to different powers. And what you're actually trying to do is suck up one of your balls and then spit it at an opponent's ball to kind of knock off their shots or something. So you take like a round as Kirby, then a round of pool.
Oh, gosh.
I know.
This is getting confusing. All right. Okay, here's a pitch. It's a 3D platformer set in the Kirby universe where instead of walking around, you're rolling around. And that's kind of the gimmick, is that it's like Monkey Ball, but a platformer where you have these kind of big 3D worlds, like a ukulele type world with the big old mountain, but everything there is a sphere. And so as you tilt the course, you are navigating it as this ball rolling around Kirby. So it's kind of Marble Madness. It's a little bit Monkey Ball. It's a little bit like Sonic 3D Blast.
Yeah, we'll finally use those tilt controls.
Yeah, there you go. There could be billiards elements in there. I'm just having a really hard time putting this together. I want to figure this out, though. This is our challenge.
This is our hardest puzzle yet. Thank you, David. So
this is
okay. 3D world. Kirby is moving around. He can only roll. Maybe there is.
Is this the difficulty? Is that the interesting thing about pool is that the balls deflect each other when they collide. The interesting thing about Kirby is that he absorbs things when they collide. These things are fundamentally opposed to each other. And so I'm having a hard time reconciling.
Yes. So the question is the game about maybe Kirby absorbing enough stuff so that he can take on a property to move or manipulate certain objects in the world? So, traditionally Kirby has always just been, suck in and eat one thing and spit it out right away. Whereas maybe this version of Kirby is able to, he goes around the stage and he eats a bunch of one particular type of thing so that he can reach one area and then literally put himself in the pocket, like hit a goal or a flag of like a platforming challenge.
Each of these kind of like open-ish worlds, Banjo-Kazooie ukulele style, has like 15 balls and 15 pockets.
Oh, yes.
And the challenge is to find a way to interact with the balls. Either maybe they're massive, and so you need to eat something big to grow big to be able to bat them around. Maybe they're frozen in something, so you have to eat something fiery to break it free.
This actually could all be part of, there's kind of two ways to play the game, right? Because Kirby games are sometimes have been known as easier kind of games. So maybe there's, just like you do in pool, you can kind of call your shot. And so when you encounter a ball, if you say, hey, I promise to get this into a goal that is on the other side of the map, or maybe the game just does that for you, right? If you get, sort of object X into difficult goal Y that is far away, or you need to really be varying your powers and managing this thing rolling around or whatever, then you get like more points or better stars or, the golden moons or whatever it is. Whereas you could also just play it in, if you find the ball or you manage to reach the ball, there'll probably be a pocket within, relative proximity based on, the normal difficulty curve of the game.
We are over time, but I say that we make an executive motion to stick with this one until we get it figured out, because I'm not leaving this one incomplete. All right. So if the game is built on tilt controls, whether that's actually tilting the Switch console or whether that's just using the sticks to tilt the world, like in Monkey Ball, then those tilt controls would also affect these giant kind of goal balls because they are spherical, and it would be weird for them to not be affected by gravity like everything else is.
I mean, maybe, but also depending on, if Kirby eats a fire flower and that is the only thing that can push around the ice ball, and that sort of thing. So, there's a lot of, potentially you get the firepower, you have to sort of keep it and maintain it without getting hit or losing that power all the way to that ball. And then you have to get that ball either into an easier pocket or a more difficult pocket. And all the while, it's like one hit and Kirby loses his power.
I think this is more difficult than it needs to be. I could see this as a Game Boy game that's just a billiards game, but with a Kirby palette swap. But you know what? That's not what we're here to do. We're here to make this interesting. But what if we do simplify it a little bit? All right, so let's kind of strip out the complicated 3D platformery bits and just think about like a relatively flat table, maybe with some texture, kind of like that Gods Playing Soccer game that we had in one of the earliest episodes. I think that was episode 2 even. But anyways, so, okay, relatively flat table. You still hit a ball when you are kind of charging yourself towards it, and it does deflect away from you, but the first one you touch, you kind of absorb its power set, which is not really the way that Kirby works, but maybe for this type of game, I don't really know a better solution.
Okay.
You get the power... No.
So let's because I agree with you. We're gonna crack this nut, and we're gonna do it in the style that only our podcast can. So, what are some of the core tenets that we like and want to keep? And I think that is, we seem to be hovering around absorbing things, but is that the important part of Kirby, or is just Kirby's physically rolling around what we need to go to with Kirby?
Kirby needs to roll around in this game. Like, that's kind of an inalienable aspect of this pitch. And so, that has to stay, but the interaction with other objects is what I'm having trouble with.
What if we give Kirby less of an action-y game and almost more of a chill Pilot Wing style pool game where we have Kirby's the cue ball and it's just about making trick shots, right? And as opposed to having wind-up controls where you're pulling back on the pool stick, it's in some way you're building momentum with Kirby, or you are using a Kirby power to complete some of these shots.
Okay. Where is he getting these powers then?
It's a very good question. I don't know if I have an answer, but we almost have to figure out what the end of the game looks like before we get to the beginning and retcon in Kirby's existence into this pool world.
Okay.
What's cool about pool? I love pool trick shots. Angles are very important. Maybe there's something about solids and stripes.
Yeah.
Kirby have sort of a mode switch where he could be solid Kirby or striped Kirby.
Okay, so the thing about pool is that the cue ball usually only ever hits one other ball.
Yeah.
And so if there was kind of an Ikaruga-like element where it's like you have to touch solids in certain states and stripes in a certain state, you really only have to plan for one hit. And then those balls can hit each other and go their separate ways and everything. But the cue ball itself is not bouncing around like a pinball would. Maybe this is just a billiards table with a little bit of kind of texture to it. Maybe we can drop the power absorbing, because I think in Kirby Tilt and Tumble, I don't think there was a lot of like power absorbing going on in that one. So maybe it's not like a fundamental part of the formula. And even the rainbow curse, like where you draw the line and Kirby just follows it around. I don't know if you could get powers in that one. Maybe not. I don't remember.
Oh, H, what if we took from Tilt and Tumble? In Tilt and Tumble, Kirby can kind of roll over flat stars, almost like you drive over the flat question marks in Mario Kart. So what if it was playing a pool game, but you had modifiers where you could bring in some Kirby pinball stuff and actually put some pinball elements on the table. And then you could also put, if you hit the ball, which happens to be Kirby, right? Because Kirby's pinball land, Kirby literally just is a pinball. I guess the only thing canonical about Kirby is that he is around. So you also put down those
sometimes he has a massive chin. So
that's okay. So now we also put Kirby on, and we put those flat stars down on the table, and you can get more points for making your shot go over and capture those stars, right? So now you have a kind of a point game on top of it, and then you give the table all sorts of crazy, weird layouts like Kirby's pinball does.
Okay, yeah.
And put the pockets in weird places.
Yes, okay. This is a good direction. You have traditionally, I think it's like 6 pockets on the different corners and sides of the table. It remains more or less in that same layout, but it can be a different shape. It can have elevation changes. It can have little divots, like a Sonic 3D Blast course. It can have all sorts of environmental hazards, things you'll have to go around, things you'll have to maybe shoot a ball over.
Yeah, it takes on like a mini golf kind of aesthetic to it, only you're dealing with billiards.
Yeah, but it also has these pads on the ground, and each time you shoot a ball over that, it's like a triple word score in Scrabble or something, and it adds to that ball's value. And this game, you are competing against either a friend or a computer. And so as each ball rolls over more of these spaces, it can kind of like bank those points and become more valuable. So you could really try to raise the value of a single ball by batting it around for many turns, but you might be leaving it open for your opponent to take that shot, the meta knight to come in and take that shot and sink that ball that you've worked so hard to put all those points into. We can kind of drop the solids and stripes because this one has to be a little bit more free for all. I can see that working.
Yeah, and then that way you can start putting, hazards and stuff on the table that like take away points from those balls. So like, oh my God, you messed up our 8-ball or whatever that had so many points on it I was counting on. And both players are trying to both make the score go up as high as they can, but they're also taking the risk that their opponent is not going to sink it before they do.
And there's different modifiers on this game as well. You could have a version that's kind of traditionally turn-based like regular pool, or you can have like a real-time pool game. Just
everyone hitting everything always.
Yeah, like I'm thinking about the Street Pass mode in Super Smash Bros. For the 3DS. You play these little like circles that are little icons of the characters, and there's like 12 of you on this little tiny stage, and you can basically just move all around this stage freely and then charge up a shot. And when you start charging, you lock yourself into a position, and this big old triangle extends, that shows you which direction you're facing, extends in front of you. And the longer you charge, the more powerful your shot is. And you use that to knock your opponents off of the map. So this game, you could charge your shots to just shoot these pool balls at the pockets. And, maybe the pockets are guarded with backboards. So, you can, if you get them in the general direction and you don't overshoot it, then they can go in. Maybe you get points for bouncing the ball and sinking many of them at the same time on smaller tables. Maybe you have certain modes where it only drops in one at a time, or it drops them in at intervals. And maybe there's sometimes it's all of the balls at once. But you always have the 8-ball, which you don't want to sink.
If you sink the 8-ball, obviously you lose. And if it's in the heat of the moment, you might be more apt to do that if two people are playing simultaneously.
It's all chaotic like that.
Yeah, and I like the idea that if you hit certain things on the table, like you said, there's textures on the table that maybe increase ball movement speed or
ice
set
or
them.
something.
Yeah, exactly. And like oil or something that, well, I guess oil would make it slick, but something sticky that like just kills the momentum of a shot that you thought you had. There's a lot when you start playing with the board in the theme of the Kirby land more than I think worrying about Kirby absorbing all the powers.
And if it's all about mobility, and if you can move freely instead of being kind of anchored in place like a cue ball, then there's an aspect of this that turns into a little bit like Rocket League, where you can see your opponent, zooming in to take a shot on the goal, on one of the pockets rather in this case, and you can jump in there and get in its way and knock it into another hole, and just kind of whoever touches it last before it goes in. That might be a little tricky. Maybe you each have separate pockets that you're shooting for, or maybe it is just whoever touched it last. I don't know. Anyway, it's not important right now, but some aspect of kind of keeping the action and the momentum up like you would get in those tight clutch Rocket League moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense too in the Kirby series, especially because Kirby for most of the series is kind of almost always on the move, right? Especially in the Rainbow Curse, where he literally cannot stop moving. You can just kind of control where he goes.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. You know what? I think I'm satisfied with how it is right now. We can throw it back to the community to see if they have anything that they would like to add to it. And if you would like to add something to that, go ahead and tweet us at PlaywrightCast. Go to our website, playwrightcast.com, where you can comment on any previous episode, or even leave us an iTunes comment, or you can email us, playwrightcast@gmail.com. And hey, if you're on our website or if you're emailing us anyways, why not drop us a pitch of your own? And we will read that on the show, and we will do our damnedest to puzzle it over just like we've done with this one.
If this episode doesn't prove it to you, I don't know what does, right?
We take this very seriously.
Yes. Also, special thank you to PROTODOME for the use of our theme song, Hello World. It's from his album Blue Noise. It's really good, and you can get to it from playwrightcast.com while you're there.
Yes, that is PLAYWRITECAST. That is all for today. I will take us out with a very quick idea. You play an out-of-control ice cream truck barreling down a hill trying to avoid hitting anybody, but still throwing the children ice cream.
Perfect.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.